Welcome to The Forest Garden, a podcast for gardeners who are interested in transforming their landscapes into biodiverse food forest systems. Today's episode of The Forest Garden is really a special one, at least for Ben and myself. In this episode, we interview Jonathan Bates, who, with his friend Eric Tonesmeyer, designed and stewarded Paradise Lot in Holyoke, Massachusetts for many years. This biological oasis, smack dab in the middle of a semi-urban environment, really inspired me to pursue an entirely new career path. It's our hope that this episode similarly inspires you.
It's nice to get connected with you, Jonathan. I've been following your work and Eric's work for quite some time right now. And when Mike suggested you, I thought you'd be a great guest for the podcast. So I'm looking forward to learning more about what you're working on nowadays. Are you in New York now, or where are you based?
Yeah, so we moved to New York, just outside of Ithaca in Brooktondale, New York, a little over 5 years ago.
One of my two of my lab mates here are from, I think, that area, from like the Ithaca area. I've been sort of surprised to learn about the community there that exists for whether it's perennial vegetables or tree crops, homesteading. I didn't really, when I moved away from New England, I wasn't part of that community. So I was surprised to hear that sort of everything's alive and well up there. How do you like New York?
It's really amazing. I moved with my family, my wife, Megan, and my son, Jesse, who's 9. We moved for lots of reasons, but one of them to be closer to Megan's families. She's got a pretty great network of family here. Megan's dad comes from a farming family, and he has been stewarding about 70 acres for the last 30 years organically. We had a sense that we might inherit some of that, and we did. We inherited 10 acres of it 2 years ago.
Great. I'm sure you have plenty of ideas, if you haven't already, of what you're going to be doing on that site.
Yeah, it's already started.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure you don't waste too much time.
That's so exciting. Maybe we should kind of transition into the formal beginning of the episode. So, Jonathan, how did you sort of get started in this world of plant nerdery that we exist within?
Thanks for having me here tonight. This is really a privilege, and to be able to talk a little bit about myself and help others. Yeah, so I mean, I've kind of considered myself an environmentalist for most of my life. I'm 47 now. I'd say I really got into regenerative ag, permaculture, organic agriculture back in around 2001, where I met Eric Tonesmeyer. We collaborated on some gardens in Massachusetts for a few years together, and then realized that we were a good match and as friends and colleagues and gardeners. So we decided to jump in with some property in Holyoke, Massachusetts. And that's where really things took off. Eric was writing with Dave Jacke, the Edible Forest Gardens book. That's where Eric really became a well-known author. Then he wrote Perennial Vegetables. And during the period where those two books were happening, that's where I really started to be inspired by the idea of perennial systems as both a healer for humans and the biodiversity that it helped, regenerate, and also a opportunity for community to be inspired and heal as well. That's really what sold me on the potential of perennial ag systems and perennial gardens, food systems. And I could go on, but I think I'll just say, and you can ask your next question, is the experiment we had in Holyoke was pretty amazing in lots of ways. But I think one of the things that really stood out for me was we went into it with an idea and some assumptions, planting 300 species of useful and edible plants on a 10th of an acre with the hope that something would happen, particularly meeting some goals. And, the idea of, if you're designing a food forest or edible garden or a home garden in the image of a native ecosystem, that you could that things would pop. Like you could really see and experience and be in nature, quote unquote, in a different way. And that really happened. It was a dream or a philosophy or a theory or a idea, and then it came into reality and it actually happened. And that to me is really what got me going and why I'm still doing it after all these years.
It's really inspiring to hear that you sort of set out to achieve these goals and were able to achieve them. Would you attribute that to, really proper site analysis and design early on? Or was it just the fact that you guys were just so passionate about what you were doing that it evolved as it went into something that, was able to meet that finish line or those goals that you set up?
Yeah, it was a combination. I mean, we were really geeky in the beginning with our garden was a case study in the Edible Forest Gardening book that Dave and Eric wrote. And, we really took it to the detailed design process. And, if anyone's interested to kind of get into the nitty gritty of how that happened, I would check out those books. I realized once we started putting the system in place based on the assessment and the goals, and we really lived in it, it really was the ecology, the ecosystem, the interactions, the relationships between all the animals and plants that really made it pop. And I think who knows really what's going on. We don't really know as human beings really the extent of it, but I really feel like it was the diverse relationships between all the parts, that if the diversity and the opportunity for interaction wasn't there, it wouldn't have been as successful. Both with the plants and animals and humans being an animal in that system, like the community that was inspired and engaged with the system was pretty amazing too.
Yeah, that seems like a component that gets left out quite a bit when people are talking about forest gardens or community gardens or perennial systems, is the human element of it, and making sure that the stakeholders are involved in the design process and are able to maintain what's being designed and built. And as far as the perenniality of the system that you were working with, you mentioned before that you see perennial systems as a healer for humans, and I'm just wondering, it's something that I believe intrinsically, but I haven't really heard discussed too often. Could you give an example or just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty broad and detailed. There's lots of aspects to that, but I think in general, obviously there's the food piece. We got 80% of our fresh greens and berries covered by the garden throughout most of the year. So, we really were eating healthy, nutritious food. I think there was also the healing of the thousands of people that passed through that landscape over the years. And I'm not exaggerating there. It really was thousands of people. Even in the books too, it wasn't just people in person physically. It was the people reading the experience and watching videos too. And then there's the healing of the landscape to the point where the soul, like you could stand in the place and really feel I wouldn't call it energy, but you just knew that there was something going on. It was, so green and healthy and thriving, and there was birds and other animals that wouldn't have been there otherwise, and frogs and newts. This is like a mile from downtown Holyoke, which in some ways is part of the Rust Belt collapse from the 70s and still is. It was quite, we even had, I don't know if it was in the book or not, but we even had a wild turkey come in within the first 5 years, just waddled into the backyard at one point. That was pretty impressive.
Wow, what stamp of approval on the land, the ecosystem that you've created.
Yes.
When you were talking about healing and the ways that site really impacted wide swaths of people. I mean, part of the reason, or I guess the main thing that got me into this whole world was just seeing some video on YouTube of you being interviewed in the bioshelter. And then I'm pretty sure that Ben's introduction was reading Edible Forest Gardens for the first time. So, I mean, the two of us, this podcast is literally a testament to like that experience with us. And it definitely, I would call it sort of a healing journey. I was in a totally different place. At least for me, I was in a totally different place before I started getting interested in this world of perennial edibles and whatnot. So I don't know. I just thought I should bring that up, that what we're doing right now is a result of what you two did before.
I feel like the first thing that came to mind when you said that as healing or just maybe helping us change our philosophy or change our mindset when you're switching over from dealing with annual systems or typical vegetable gardens to food forests and the things that you design and that you talk a lot about. It makes me think intrinsically, it makes me think long term about what am I investing into? And in some cases, do I want to be investing in things that I might not be around to see? And the answer is yes, definitely. But I think before I got into working with perennial systems with trees, shrubs, it was more just like, let's see how quickly we can make food and grow food. And now it's like, okay, well, we'll grow some food for now, some food for later, and some food for a generation or 2 generations away. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe, Mike, you mentioned the bioshelter, which I think I saw, I watched, I think, a few videos with you, Jonathan, where I remember you discussed the greenhouse system that you have and some of the unique ways you use thermal mass to grow things in Holyoke that you wouldn't necessarily be able to grow, unprotected or without considering the microclimate. Could you, talk a little bit about the work that you did designing the greenhouse and the thermal mass and what it allowed you to grow?
Yeah, so I think in the Northeast, at least for the next 20 years or so, we're going to need to remember that season extension is important for these systems and for health of humans, because the 4 months of winter for many cold climates around the world, we can't depend on faraway food necessarily. So the bioshelter, I was kind of studying and interested in the bioshelter back when I was in Vermont in the early 2000s. And then when I got to Holyoke, Eric and I knew that we wanted some kind of greenhouse for sure. And then, I think it is in the book. So in Paradise Lot, we talked briefly about the Snowtober, where a tree next door partially collapsed on our first greenhouse. That inspired us to turn a problem into solution, and we were able to, first of all, pay to have the tree cut down so the next greenhouse wouldn't get smashed by a tree. We wanted to do it the best system we could possibly put there in that small space. So I designed I actually went around the Northeast looking at a bunch of people already doing it to get inspired with ideas and reading books, and was able to put together a mishmash of techniques and technologies to create a non-permanent, almost completely recycled materials, super insulated bioshelter. Is only 400 square feet. And a big piece of that, not only insulation, it was double a house's insulation value on the back side. But the middle of the greenhouse had almost 1,000 gallons of water in big tote tanks. And I think the combination of the well-insulated building with the thermal mass of the water, and the fact that we didn't put a foundation in, it was just the soil. So I did put perimeter insulation in, so that helped the inside of the soil of the greenhouse stay above freezing throughout the year. In fact, on a really cold year, I measured it; it stayed above 40 degrees. Without any heat, just through the mass of the earth and the super insulation and the perimeter insulation. So it's now been, I don't know, it's well over a decade. We still are able to grow citrus in that building without any supplemental heat at all. And in fact, one of the citrus plants, the Calamansi, which is like a little half size sour clementine. It has hundreds and hundreds of fruit consistent throughout the year, because now its
Wow.
flowering time is it's perpetual. And so that's, to me, that's a huge success, to be able to grow healthy citrus in that kind of climate. There's a Meyer lemon there now that's producing well, and also a mandarin orange, a super cold tolerant mandarin orange, which I'm not remembering the name at the moment, but it can go down to like 20 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow. That sounds pretty nice to have some sort of citrus growing all year long. Were there any things from your work with Paradise Lot in terms of, seeing the system from, start to maturity? Were there any things that you learned along the way that either you got right and you're glad that you got right, or some mistake that you're like, oh, I wish I knew that when I started? Like, just considerations, whether it was like winter sun angles or access points, something that maybe someone who wanted to create that system themselves might not think of?
Yeah, I'd say probably some of the big ones were, we didn't deal with water flow in the landscape very well, both for management but also for catchment and use later. So that was huge. We never really solved that issue. We were on city water, and so the deep mulch system that we did on the whole site helped a lot throughout the years, but we definitely did a lot of watering in the first 3 to 5 years of stuff that to get them established with city water, and that was a challenge. What else? Well, this is kind of funny. This came on later, a little later, but we'd never designed the garden to be kid friendly. Both of us ended up having boys with our partners, and so that was a little bit of a challenge. There wasn't really a traditional place for them to play there, but they found ways to use the space for fun. A lot of digging happened because a lot of dirt around, a lot of water play because we did have a little pond. They loved adventuring and finding the fruit. The fruit was pretty much from May to October. There was something fruiting every month pretty much. So those all things work for them as boys growing up. But the traditional lawn where you play lawn games wasn't available. We didn't kick a ball around. So what else? I think another piece that we didn't quite understand until we started doing it is there was a lot of experiments, and some of the experiments were pretty amazing to experience and see whether they were successes or failures, but some of the experiments were really a problem that some of them we're still dealing with. So like we planted Hotunia
Oh no.
in one of the front beds on the front side of the house, not in the back, but we didn't realize how much it would spread. And so that actually took many years to start to extinguish through various means. And it wasn't easy. It's still there in some places, and we just have to manage it.
Yep.
And the reason is because it's a running plant, but it also is very, very, very shade tolerant, and so it can run under other things really easily. And we didn't quite understand that. Things like that, even bamboo. We have a bamboo grove in the backyard in a rhizome barrier. We knew intuitively that rhizome barriers are 80% effective, which means they're not effective. It's definitely, we have to manage it every other year, because the rhizomes jump the barrier all the time, because it really mulches itself really well, and the mulch turns into soil, and then they essentially grow through their own mulch. So the running things, and then there are tree and shrub and other experiments that things either were too small and weren't productive enough, so we took them out, or they were too big and they became a problem, and we had to either manage them more than we wanted or had to rip them out. So, on a scale like that, when you're experimenting a lot, have the income and the time to do that and the interest, then in some cases it's fine. But if someone wanted a more stable system, it does become an issue. And then I guess the last thing is fencing. Probably in most landscapes can be a challenge, and it really was a factor for us for various animals throughout the time we were there, or the time I was there. Skunks and cats and dogs and people, and it's a different, again, a different species makeup in an urban environment than a rural environment, but the systems you have to put in place are still necessary.
Sure. Sometimes when you plant for wildlife, nature doesn't discriminate. You get whatever wildlife you get.
Yep.
It may or may not be the kind of wildlife you want. So maybe we could transition a little bit forwards of the Paradise Lot into, kind of what you're doing now with, my understanding is the Food Forest Farm Nursery, it looks like. And are there any other projects right now that you're working on?
Yes. One transitional thing I'll mention is Eric Tonmeyer still lives in our duplex with Paradise Lot. He's actually very, very soon, hopefully going to be transitioning to a new landscape. That's still to be determined, but it might happen. But what's really exciting is we found an organization to potentially take on the future care and stewardship of the landscape. In the event that Eric leaves, there's a hope that the gardens and building will be purchased by them. And we've already started the process. What's really cool about this organization, which I don't know how public they want to be at this point, so I won't mention them directly, but they're a queer, women of color owned cooperative, and they're just getting started, and our unit and garden might be the first of many for them to invest in and have a membership for. And the fact that they picked us to be kind of their jumping off point for their project and their vision was pretty inspiring for us and hopeful. And so that's pretty great to kind of wrap up Eric and I's chapter at that site. For me, now that I've actually gone through what I call my assessment phase over the last 5 years living here in New York. We didn't really want to jump in right off the bat. So I think we're now in a stage of kind of matching our assessment of our life and our vision with the actual new site that we have now. It's 10 acres right here. It's kind of on the border of the town of Ithaca. We're literally a mile from the town line, and it's right on a major highway. So for us, it's a beautiful place. So for us, it's a coming home for both opportunity for the vision we have and for engaging with the community in a more robust and impactful way. We're definitely going to continue developing education opportunities and experiences where people can come and visit and learn. And in this case, there'll be some small scale stuff still that I want to pursue, but I'm really excited about the larger landscape and opportunity to engage more with a larger site and a landscape that's more wild. So there's a lot of biodiversity there that is much larger and more interesting to design around. We have fox, we have deer, people have cited bobcat. I was just looking the other day, and we're in a region, a very small area where the endangered wood turtle lives. And so we have this, that's a national threatened species. So to me, that's exciting to help steward a landscape that might help a endangered species. Another piece of that's exciting, there's the social piece, which I could get into, but for me as a plant geek and a nature geek, environmentalist, I'm going to design in a more wild sense, in that I want to really challenge myself around what mid-succession ecosystem would look like on 6 or some acres. In my mind, it will be a lot more of what an old field mosaic might look like rather than a backyard food forest. And that, to me, it's very new and interesting. I think there's a lot of opportunity to make a landscape even more low maintenance, because you're essentially even more integrating plants into a landscape that will just thrive and be resilient on their own. Like, for example, there is a plant on my landscape that Eric showed me that I didn't even know was there. It's called, one of the names is raisin tree. It's a viburnum, and it has these kind of black wrinkled berries in the fall, and they dry up on the tree, and when you eat them, they're kind of raisin like. Why not encourage that to grow some more? You know,
Yeah, actually, Mike and I just tried that, the raisins from that, I believe.
No, what we had was Japanese raisin tree. The one that Jonathan is talking
okay.
about is I believe the wild raisin, like the native viburnum. What we had was the Japanese introduction.
but you got the idea anyway.
Yes.
I didn't know there was a Japanese one. That's cool. I should check that out. So for me, we already have the beginnings of about a 1 acre agroforestry planting in place that has been developed over the last 2 years, 3 years now. This will be the third year. It's more of what you would think of a woodland design rather than a backyard, a home garden or something. Because we're doing timber trees in there. We have like pecan and honey locust and black locust and oak. It's a totally different scale, and I'm working with species that I have very little experience with so far, but I'm excited to try it out.
And so the more open woodland landscape that you're sort of working with now, what are the advantages you see? I mean, you mentioned lower maintenance because, if the trees are planted less densely, there's maybe less management in terms of, having to reduce competition, maybe like pull back on this ground cover or prune this tree, because if they're spaced wider, you're maybe not going to have quite as much competition there. Are there other benefits? I mean, do you think that there's potentially more biodiversity from increasing the amount of herbaceous material that's in the landscape as opposed to that sort of dense forest cover?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we designed the Paradise Lot food forest, edible forest garden system in Holyoke, we were very purposeful, knowing that in the Northeast, a mid-succession food forest would be the most productive because that's what the ecosystem tells us. So if you look at the energy efficiency of a mid-succession kind of sub shrubs, a few tree type system, that's the most efficient use of photosynthesis in that mid succession. So I know already that the energy is better utilized by the ecosystem. And so I think what I would probably end up doing is it would be low maintenance in terms of not having to water and weed as much. I think where my energy would go towards, my labor would be a lot more pruning and maintenance of overgrowth that then could be utilized for chop and drop to build the soil. We're going to have a wood stove, so we'll be able to harvest our fuel for our heat for our house. I want to probably at some point have enough to do more biochar to also jumpstart the soil biology and systems. And I also see all these quote unquote extras as potential future enterprises too. So like, if I start to produce enough biochar, just kind of like with my nursery, I overproduced perennial vegetables, so it became a nursery opportunity enterprise. I see if I plant the system in a certain way, I feel like the enterprises will start to pop out. One enterprise is I'm planting hybrid poplar and hybrid willow on the landscape because I know now that they are really, really love it's a kind of a, during wet years, it's definitely good for the willow and the poplar type trees that can take wet feet in the wintertime. They thrive. And so the poplar I see as a rotational wood coppice within the next 5 years, where I get straight pole wood that I can chop up for people going on camping trips. I can get $5 a bundle. And so that's a real easy kind of product to come out of a landscape like that. There's essentially, besides the planting and keeping the deer away, almost zero maintenance with a benefit. When you prune, you're creating logs to sell. That's just an example of kind of how I see some of these species becoming useful.
Gotcha. I'm curious, when you say you're working with some species that you've never worked with before, are you potentially integrating nut trees into the landscape, or what are your, in terms of some of the larger long-term species, tree crops, I suppose. What are you thinking about?
Well, it's both the shrubs, a lot of shrubby things that I never really have done a lot of digging or planting or maintaining. Like our site will be great for elderberry, for example. We only had one elderberry in Holyoke, and it actually was later in our design, many years after we initially planted the plants, we put that in. So I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I do know on our site, they're on our site, and I know there are places in our landscape where we can plant many more of them and things like that. I mentioned the raisin tree is another one that is kind of elderberry like. It can take wet feet and only grows 12 feet tall. It doesn't get much bigger, maybe 15. But the big boys like oak, I planted about probably a good 50 acorns this last fall to see if I can. It's like a little bit of an acorn swarm. I wanted to see in about a 30-foot long raised bed to see if I can get enough to grow fast enough above browse height, because the deer pressure is pretty intense there. And then the vole pressure, which is a little rodent, a native rodent, they're pretty intense. They girdle trees pretty easily there. So I'm trying to reduce my use of plastic tree tubes because they're very expensive and they're pain in the ass to maintain. So I'm starting to do some techniques where I'm just going to be putting out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trees, hoping that some of them will make it. But yeah, this one oak I collected from Cornell. Cornell is the Botanic Garden is a great repository of material. Some of those oak trees over there are improved varieties. I found Ken Ashworth, which is a Quercus microcarpa. It was I think it's St. Lawrence Nursery, 30 or 40 years ago. It's one of those sweet white oaks. So I actually was quite astonished. One tree I found was literally, you could eat fresh. There was hardly any bitterness.
That's really impressive.
And my hope, there's a lot of oak around, so I don't know what the seedlings will produce. They, some of them might be similar, some of them might be non-similar just because they cross-pollinate. But my hope is I'll get a dozen or so out of it that are also sweet acorns. So to me, this is a new adventure.
Yeah, I've heard of there's a swamp white oak cultivar called the Lint white oak that is supposed to be so low in tannins that you can't even perceive them. I guess there's different sort of types of tannins that oaks can have, and certain ones our tongues can pick up on and other ones they don't. And so certain cultivars or certain varieties or seedlings will produce more or less of those components. But that's exciting that you were able to find one that was sweet like that. I've never had a sweet acorn before. For people listening who don't know, most acorns have a high tannin content. You have to go through a process of leaching to make them edible, but there are certain types that have, like I just was saying, less tannins. And if you're like me, you don't like to process or take time to remove compounds from edible products. It's great just to pick it off the tree and eat fresh.
So is the plan that once Eric potentially sells the place and moves on, is he going to come up there and you guys are going to be broing out in the upstate New York landscape, or is he going off somewhere else?
Yeah, that's still to be determined, but I would say that he's probably not going to move to a colder climate. He's pretty much clear on that one. Even though I have the potential to draw him forth, I don't think that's in the stars. No, he really like I am getting into wanting to be in a bigger landscape. He is also going down that road. And for those that follow Eric, he's been very much in the last 8 years now been a super amazing writer and activist around climate change, writing books about that and co-authoring books. He really wants to be in a landscape where he can try out these larger systems with bigger and more robust trees. Just because in Holyoke, our biggest tree was probably our pawpaws, or maybe our persimmon. Our persimmon, I think, is our biggest tree. But this one tree, self-pollinating American persimmon, you can't. It's an amazing tree and we love it, but it gets a little old.
Yeah, no, I hear you. After only a few years of being in this realm of experience, I too already want like a 6 acre clean slate to plant chestnuts everywhere and just sort of have those larger format experimentations. Are is part of the reason why you're not planting some of those more unusual fruit trees just because of the immense deer and bull pressure out there?
Oh, I'm gonna try everything. I mean, I have 6 improved grafted pawpaws already in the ground. I'm gonna be doing a bunch of different kinds of persimmon varieties in the system. Pretty much I'm gonna try everything I possibly can. I'm even excited, more and more excited about. I don't know if you know, we didn't mention my fig tree work over the last 6 years or so, but I actually read an article that listed the edible fig as a animal fodder. I'll grow them for fruit, of course, but I have some varieties that seem to be more hardy than others, and I'm going to grow them as a dieback perennial because I think I can get them to be, in 3 to 5 years, I can get them to be large multi-stem plants, probably 6 or 8 feet easily in zone 5B6. They produce so much foliage once they're established. It's quite an amazing thing to consider them as a fodder for livestock.
I haven't heard of figs for fodder. I know some people will feed mulberry leaves to their animals, so it's same family at least.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing mulberries too. There's definitely a challenge. I've been noticing that the hybrid varieties that are more of the white type tend to there's a disease here that they get, and it really hits them back. But I've had a big success now with Illinois everbearing. I'm going to definitely do some more grafting of that. I had some success with some grafting. It's a delicious fruit and it's very, very fast growing. And that's definitely one that I'm going to, I want to have animals in the landscape because I'm not going to be able to maintain these systems just with me and my family and volunteers. I want to be able to have a reason to mulch figs every year or chop and drop my fast growing grasses. So I'll have Arundinodonax, which actually I've had some success with, which is the giant reed grass. Even though I've had some challenges with yellow groove bamboo, I'm probably going to put a grove of that in somewhere.
So maybe for a second, we should touch on the figgery greenhouse. I was when I came up and visited you last year, I was pretty astounded by it. And actually, that was the first time I ever ate a ripe fig. You gave me that experience. So yeah, ever since then, I've kind of delved into this black hole of researching cold hardy figs for Connecticut. And actually, Ben and I were just at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station where they're doing some in-ground research there. Was pretty impressed by some of their plants. Have there been any standout varieties for you that you like better than others? I think I got St. Rita from you and a few other cultivars that I'm forgetting the name of now, but I'm interested, just to hear what it's all been about.
Sure. I'd say from my geeky research over the last 5 years that I had to cut myself off because the 500 varieties of figs, you could spend the rest of your life trying to understand them. But for the few that I did the research on that seemed like would be short season enough and hardy enough and delicious enough for my particular situation, the one that stood out in the last 3 years for me is a fig called Floria. And the reason I like it is because it's very hardy, it's very productive, it's early. So it's one of my earliest figs. It's late August, early September, and it's medium sized. So I'm going to try that one outside without protection probably next year. I'll put a bunch in the ground because I have lots of cuttings that I can just experiment with for fun. The other one is the St. Rita. I feel like that's close second in terms of its hardiness, its size. But one variety I want to do some more thinking about there. So most of the ones I have are either kind of purple brown or blackish varieties like Ronde Bordeaux. But I'm really excited more and more with the green varieties that have more of a strawberry jam flavor, and they're much bigger. But the challenge with those is getting them to, they're more like a 90-day fig, where the other ones I was mentioning were 70-day figs. So you really have to have that like last month protection and heat, enough heat to get them to ripen to full size, the fruits. And so those are the ones that I think have a lot of potential for like retail opportunities and lots of food per fruit. But and there's a couple of those that I haven't done a lot with those because I didn't find many that were early seasoned that were large fruited or even hardy. So two that I have there, one is called White Triana, which is from this guy Joe out of Boston. And there's other ones too that are similar, Adriatic, JH Adriatic, that fruits around the same, ripens around the same time. There's I think it's called Brooklyn White, is one that is more yellow, but it's much bigger. But that's more of a later fig, but it's supposed to be hardy. But yeah, like they're more like in the line of like Adriatic or honey fig, or kind of two different of the larger yellow green figs. I don't have a lot of experience with those, but they have a lot of potential. I think the Connecticut is probably able to do a lot more with those varieties. But up here, it's the kind of Chicago hardy types, or the Celeste types, or the Ronde de Bordeaux, or the Violet de Bordeaux. Those are the medium to small, kind of black to purple figs. Ronde de Bordeaux definitely is in my top 5 for quality, all the qualities I like and characteristics. The problem I'm finding though, and I read this early on and I didn't want to believe it, but it doesn't like to be pruned for the next season. Like, so I planted one against a foundation here on this farm where I'm living at right now. I'm in between the two farms at the moment. It's a 4-year-old tree, and last year we had to cut it back pretty hard to get it to overwinter in the ground with some protection, and it just didn't produce fruit here on the new canes. And I read that it doesn't really like to be pruned. So that one has a lot of potential for unheated high tunnel production, I think, because it's early and hardy and grows really well, but it won't work outside, I don't think.
I think you probably just turned a lot of our listeners on to the world of cold climate figs.
There's a lot there. We all need to be working on it because it's a tree that we haven't done enough with.
Well, that's one of the things I was going to ask. Do you know if anyone's doing like breeding work with figs? Like, I know the way figs pollinate is fairly complicated, and usually in the wild at least involves wasps. So it's not like a typical flowering plant that I'm used to working with. But of course, you could do some sort of selection from just growing out seeds, perhaps from these cold hardy varieties. Like, how do you see the breeding work happening, or is it happening?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that, but for sure there's breeding work, and there has been over the years. Unfortunately, it has to be in a warm situation and with wasps. You can't do it otherwise.
Wow.
So
tree breeding is already pretty difficult, but it has to be done with wasps. Yep. Additionally, that adds a whole nother layer of complexity.
LSU did a bunch of work for many years, and they created many varieties, but that was, it's in Louisiana. So that tells you the kind of place you'd have to be. And California has done some breeding work.
Right.
So some of the plants that I have in ground, I acquired from you, from Food Forest Farm. To our listeners out there, if they are interested in purchasing any divisions or cuttings from you, where can they find you at?
Yeah, so I would say, thanks for asking about future opportunities. I would say in the next 3 years, for sure, we'll get our work and focus and inspiration going again at Food Forest Farm in Ithaca, New York. And most likely you can get access to that new frontier of our work at foodforestfarm.com. I would say we've decided on a name for the new land. We're going to call it a Long Spoon. We don't know yet how that will manifest as a entity, but there will be tours, there will be workshops, there will be skill shares, there will be some kind of food and culture hub is what we're calling it, where we want to engage our local community in some of these really interesting systems that we've been talking about, particularly in being in a rural place. Many people that are listening to this might know, how we've been bombarded by fascists and the right wing over the last many years, and it's just going to get worse. And so my hope is to inspire people around me in rural areas to see the landscape in a new light, one that can heal, one that can bring inspiration, one that can help us see that hate and discrimination and lack of love for fellow human beings and the earth is a bad idea. We don't want to punch the horse in the mouth, so to speak. Look at the teeth of the horse. I don't know what
look at gift horse in the mouth. Is that it?
Gift horse in the mouth, or whatever. We need to be kind to each other and our soil. And right now, I'd say it seems to me that in general the mainstream isn't going down that road very well. I would say there are people doing great work and there are amazing projects out there already, and that's inspiring to me. I'm not saying that all is lost, but we got to work harder and we got to come together. And I think a regenerative, perennial, productive landscape is one tool, one way to help guide us in the right direction.
What a lovely way to wrap up our discussion for today.
Cool.
Thank you, Jonathan, for coming on and talking about your passion, your love, your work. And we're all very grateful that you're out there doing it.
Seriously, I would say that inspiration is really maybe the silver lining of this episode today. Both Ben and I were inspired to do what we're doing in terms of experimenting in this world of perennial edibles because of Paradise Lot and because of your work and Eric's work. So really it's been so influential on us, and I'm sure so many other people as well. And to our listeners who have stuck around this long, I really hope that this episode makes an impact on you or your family and changes things for the better for you and your community and our collective future. Thanks for sticking with us, and see you next time.